I still remember years ago, before this channel was even something I thought that I could do, when review copies of the original Monster Hunter World board game first got sent to the big board game review channels. A number of them, the creators said that there was room in their collection for both this and other boss battlers like Primal. I had decided on Primal, I'm pretty sure before Monster Hunter even came out. And so when Monster Hunter World came out, despite my love of the franchise, I decided to hold off and see how it turned out. Well, now I have Monster Hunter World Iceborne, and I spent this weekend learning it, playing it, and trying to decide whether or not my collection, stuffed to the gills with oversized boss battlers, had room for one more based on one of my two favorite video game properties. Monster Hunter World Iceborne is a quintessential boss battler. I'm a big fan of boss battlers, and as I played it, I compared it to Oathsworn, Dark Souls, Adventure Tactics, and of course, Primal the Awakening. So how does it hold up against such illustrious competition? Before I do a full review, I usually like to play a game more than 4 times, like I played Monster Hunter World Iceborne, but I want to get my thoughts on the game out to you guys before the Pledge Manager closes, in case you would like to back. And that is happening in like a day. If you're watching this in February 2025, you still have time. And the link is in the description. So in this review, you might hear more hedging, more in my experiences and from what I played. But I do think I have my head around what I experienced in the game. It's just not an exhaustive experience. So realize that there may be other experiences there in the box that are different from what I say. Ever since Kingdom Death Monster defined the boss battler genre, it has been nearly a law that a game can't be just boss battles. There has to be another part to it. In Adventure Tactics, you have the upgrade phase that takes longer than the battle, like twice as long in my experience. In Oathsworn, you have what could be a standalone adventure game alongside the boss battling. In Dark Souls, you have a very fun dungeon crawl up to the bosses as they grow in size and strength. I haven't played Eon Trespass Odyssey, but it sounds like you need a whole second table to contain its adventure portion. We'll see if the crawl in Kingdom Forlorn is the same. I hope not, but I'm beginning to think I shouldn't have ordered it, given the size of my table. In Monster Hunter Iceborne, you start off by selecting from the quest book which monster to hunt at one of 3 difficulty levels. Still in the quest book, you go through a choose-your-own-adventure story, reading a short entry and selecting between one of 2 options that lead to other entries, and you do that several times. This brief minigame determines what resources you gather, which become very important later on. But before that, at some point in this choose-your-own-adventure, the monster bursts onto the scene, ready to fight. You have an epic battle. If you win, you get to gruesomely carve horn, claw, and fang from the beast. You cut away scale, bone, and plate. Then you go to a camp phase in which you have a choice of several activities, the most important of which, though, is to turn all of those materials into new, more powerful weapons and armor. Then you do it all over again. That's the classic Monster Hunter cycle. So what might a person not like about Monster Hunter World Iceborne? Almost the only issue I had with Primal the Awakening was the cost of the base game. Monster Hunter World Iceborne also doesn't have a standee version and also comes with a high price tag. The mitigating factor on this is that the entry point is much more affordable because there is a retail base game. It only comes with 4 bosses to fight, but it's a complete experience and from what I've done this week, and you don't have to pay $200 just to find out if you like the game if you're on the fence about it. Another thing is that Monster Hunter World is a table hog. For people with large game tables, it's not going to matter. For people like me trying to cram it onto that It can cause some frustration before you figure out how to get everything sorted out, what you have to have ready to hand, and what you can kind of put off to the side. Mentally, I could handle playing with more characters, but I will never be able to fit more than 2 on that table. I am going to try filling my usual rulebook spot on the side tray with a 3rd character, because it seems to me that 3 characters is kind of the intended way to play. It's the character count at which you don't get palico helpers, is why I say that. I love the card-based combat in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. It's a much more satisfying puzzle than Steamforge's Dark Souls dice combat. There are just way more choices involved, but it takes up a lot of space. The new incarnation of Dark Souls that uses 2 or 3 tiles fits very comfortably on my table and causes me less frustration. Another thing that someone might not like about Monster Hunter World Iceborne is a lot of iconography with not nearly enough player aids. Need I say more? Something that some people won't like about Monster Hunter is that it kind of has built-in grind. In most games like this, you beat the boss once and then you move on. Primal has multiple levels of difficulty for each boss, similar to Monster Hunter World, but the purpose of that is to be able to get a proper challenge meeting them at different points in your journey. Early on when you're weak, or later when you're more powerful. When you fight a boss once, you get everything you need to make its equipment. In Monster Hunter World, the gear made from the different monsters requires specific parts that you get from those monsters, and each one has a handful of different ones, and you gain them randomly. If you want a full set of equipment, you could end up pushing against the 5 fight limit for each monster. Though there are strategies to get the pieces, specific pieces that you need if you research it ahead of time. So what are some things that a person could go either way with about Monster Hunter World Iceborne? Well, let's go back to the grind. I actually like it. When I figure out how to get a boss running smoothly, I often want to revisit it. For example, when playing Marvel Champions, my usual is to set up a villain and then play against it multiple times with a bunch of different heroes. When I played Primal, I played several of the bosses multiple times just because the gameplay is better once you can stop worrying about doing something wrong and just focus on the decisions. But I didn't gain anything on a campaign level by doing so. I think it's nice to have an in-game reason to grind, but I also have played thousands of hours of Monster Hunter video games, so maybe I'm the wrong person to ask. The other nice thing about facing the monsters multiple times is that the quest book has 5 different starting points for the choose your own adventure. And besides giving you different resources, they lead you to different terrain layouts. And they make a big difference in how a battle plays out. Another thing that someone might be iffy on is statuses. Okay, so here's the thing. Monster Hunter has a lot of statuses. It has 5 elements and then 7 statuses like poison, stun, and bleeding that aren't tied to elements. And you need to remember what each of them does both to you and to the monster, because that's different. I don't know why status effects are so prevalent in certain genres of games. I have never talked to anyone who actually enjoys status effects. They tend to be something that doesn't add much, except something to forget about every round and then feel guilty about. So this, from what I said, this should go in the negative column, right? Well, the way that Steamforged implemented these statuses is one of the best that I've ever encountered. They're almost all just for one turn, so you don't have to continue to remember them. You put the token someplace obvious and then you remove it. And they also all have a big enough effect that as far as when you are applying them to the monster, they're so impactful that you might want to make a whole build around certain ones to make taking down that overpowered monster easier. For example, stun makes it so the monster's attack can be dodged with only 1 agility point, meaning that you can devote your stamina to attacking instead of saving space on your stamina board for dodging. Paralysis makes it so that the monster can't move towards you, so that as long as you plan for a one node step back, you can just stand there and laugh at their loud blusterings because they can't get to you. Now, poison is still taking 2 points of damage later instead of now, and they say, just give me the damage now and let me get on with my life. But on the whole, the only game I've found that implements multiple status effects this well is Dungeon Universalis, and given that that game is a masterpiece, that is high praise. But here's the thing. I like Monster Hunter World Iceborne a lot. So let's talk about what people will almost definitely like about this game. The movement is a lot of fun. After I played Primal the Awakening, I thought, I don't know, just moving around the 4 quadrants actually feels a lot like playing the Monster Hunter video game and has a ton of depth. Maybe I don't need that extra dimension. And I still do think that, and I'm glad that they tried something so out of the box that people were really shaking their heads about. But Steamforged, while this looks traditional, they actually really did something different here too, and it's a lot of fun. The way the monster shoves you around the board makes you feel like you're really being bullied by this oversized, belligerent lizard. You feel its weight and power as you use its giant mini to shove aside your mini. But your ability to choose any one of the 3 nodes in its front quadrant to jump into before it comes at you again for its next step allows you to lead it around the map, and became one of my favorite parts of the puzzle. Like, where did I want the beast to end up? Where would it do the least damage to me and be the most vulnerable? And between leading it and playing with which character had the highest threat, how could I get it to that spot? In the playthrough going on behind me, when the beast passed through a node with snow terrain, it got a very obnoxious buff, and the board is absolutely covered in these piles of snow terrain. I had its health worn down 2/3 before I made a mistake and let it through and ended up leading it through a snow node. Like, the ability to do that was very gratifying. It made me feel very clever. The game came down to the very last turn. So with my, at least with my kind of cautious playstyle that I adopted, given that, I would have absolutely lost on time if I had let that beast get that buff even a few turns earlier. It's a bit like Oathsworn, but less freewheeling and more deliberate and weighty. Something else people are going to like about Monster Hunter World Iceborne that I've just heard across the board is the card combat crossed with the stamina system. You have slots for 5 cards, and once those are full, you can't do anything else. Not only can't you attack, but you can't dodge. And with some of these monsters' attacks, it only takes 1 hit to knock you out. But you only get to remove either 1 or 2 cards from your stamina board at the end of every turn. You're chipping away at this monstrosity's health a tiny bit at a time, and then you're going to have rounds where you can only afford 1 attack or none. The struggle is real and it is brutal. It takes constant tactical thought to not land yourself in a real bad spot. Further on with the card aspect, the attack cards that you unlock as you forge new weapons also change the feel of combat enough to be fun and to give you something to look forward to. It's less dramatic than the difference certain cards make in Primal because that game is so combo focused, but it makes enough of a difference to make things feel fresh each time you upgrade. You get to create new tactics around these new abilities. Another thing that I really enjoyed and that I was a little bit worried about was whether or not the characters were differentiated enough. This is something that I feel like I still have room to explore, given my few plays with only 2 characters, but I definitely felt the difference between the Greatsword and the Sword and Shield, even though they sound like they should be similar. If you watched my playthrough that I posted earlier, the Great Swordsman never takes a point of damage, while the Sword and Shieldsman is fully responsible for tanking. I'm just imagining that, and yet, I could have played it different because the Sword and Shieldsman is so mobile that he could act like a sniper if someone else was set up to tank. I'm just imagining what combining a melee character with a ranged character that like it seems like it could make for even more dramatic contrast. Now, the monsters I don't think feel as different. They all shove you around. They come at you with attacks that all have a damage and a dodge number and maybe a status. Now, I've only currently fought 2 of the 4 in the box, and I read the instructions for the 3rd, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were just keeping things simple for the early game when you're still learning. And regardless, one thing that those monsters definitely do add is a juicy set of weapons and armor to make from their pillaged corpses that give you new abilities and effects. That leads very naturally into what is maybe the highest point of the game, the crafting. Each character has their own tech trees and equipment from different monsters, and each one that I played emphasizes different things. Like I said earlier, even just the sort of status effect they deal out can make all the difference in your strategy. You can play entirely different. Every boss battler seems to need some kind of other phase. The choose your own adventure material gathering at the start of the quest is nice. As a person who doesn't like a ton of narrative in his games, it's the right amount for me. But it also has 5 different starting points for each monster with multiple branches so that you don't have to retread the exact same thing over and over. But the crafting in the post-fight camp phase actually competes with the battling to be the highlight of the game. It's not like Adventure Tactics, where upgrading literally totally outshines the combat, but it's up there. Very comparable to, say, Primal: The Awakening. If you like these sorts of upgrade systems, making those choices, crafting your strategies in between each fight, this will be a really significant bonus for you and could make this game, and could on its own make this game something for you to check out. Another thing people are going to like about Monster Hunter World Iceborne is that the minis are absolutely beautiful. The player characters are small, but really packed with detail. The monsters are made out of something I've never seen minis made from before. I think it's PVC from the research that I did. So you can't tell from looking, but it's soft. Look at that. I think that this needs to be used in more games. It holds and maybe if you know a lot about, I don't know a lot about minis. If you know a lot about minis and their materials, feel free to sound off in the comments. I think that this holds a good amount of detail, but is soft enough that they are nice to touch. They're also nice and weighty. The spikes don't hurt your fingertips, and if you drop them, they're probably going to survive unscathed. Now, you might be laughing at me saying, the spikes hurt your fingertips? Listen, anybody who has pried this fellow out of the Primal: The Awakening extremely durable vac form knows pain. If I remember correctly, this actually made me bleed once because there's no decent place to grab this to pry it out of the vac form except this part on the tail, which would work really well for snapping the tail off, not removing the mini. It feels more like something like this, which came in one of the Dungeons and Dragons adventure games, but you can see how low the level of detail is on this. And I would say, just judging by the flex of this, the Monster Hunter is actually even more flexible. Like I said, check out the movement on that tail, and yet the detail that it holds. To look at one from Primal: The Awakening, where it actually kind of makes you feel nervous, like the tail on this absolutely feels like it would snap if you tried to like squeeze those two things together. Now, the detail of the spikes on Primal: The Awakening I don't think is possible in that PVC plastic. And once again, I could be wrong, but none of the Monster Hunter monsters that I've seen have the ability to have these sort of projections. It looks like, these are beautiful, so I'm not dissing these at all. But I really do like the Monster Hunter World minis. Something else that people are going to really like about Monster Hunter World is that it's a really great level of brain burn without brain melt. Now, I like brain melting games, so don't think that that's an insult to those games, but you don't always want to play them. Monster Hunter World is something that I feel like you don't have to be quite as much in a specific mood to play. Thinking really matters, but you're not going along deterministic paths like branches on a tree for half an hour before dedicating to your move. You get a very good amount of information to plan your actions around, but it's not exact, allowing for surprise and reducing analysis paralysis while still giving you things to think about and rewards for planning. This is due to the way that the backs of the monsters cards work. This tells you that it's going to be it's going to attack the furthest character, and this skull tells you that it's going to attack with its head. So you see this before you flip it over, while you are making your decisions about what you are going to do. And it's a wonderful system. It's a great balance between the total knowledge of Oathsworn and Primal and the total lack of knowledge of Dark Souls, unless you really are capable of memorizing the deck like they encourage you to do. Unless you go into a fight totally like OP, you are going to have to think hard, but you're also going to have to leave some things up to luck. And for me, this fills a nice niche in my collection, and I think it will for a lot of other people too. And of course, the most obvious reason people will like this game is that if you like the Monster Hunter video games, this board game does everything possible to recreate the famous mechanisms from the video game, but in ways that make sense for a board game. When your damage deck runs out, you have to sharpen your weapon with a whetstone. When you sharpen or consume a health potion to regain health or a ration to regain stamina, it takes time. If you get damaged during that time, the recovery does not happen. How many times when you're playing the video game have you chugged a potion and then like screamed at the screen while the raging beast is bearing down on you and you won't stop flexing? Like countless times for me. In the video game, you're able to take on these massive monsters because you're swinging a ridiculously oversized weapon and they feel weighty. When you swing, you're kind of stuck. Which of its behaviors tell you that it's safe to attack and which tell you that it's time to dodge? In the board game, the backs of the monster attack cards, which you see ahead of time, give you strong hints about what it will do next. But you still have to play it safe because you can pull a time card and it can flip everything around in an instant. A card can make one character a higher threat than the other, and the monster will attack the person you didn't think they were going to. It can cause you to have to flip over the card that you thought it was going to use and instead take the next. And you can see both of those things happen if you watch my playthrough. This is a wonderful choice as a mechanism on its own, and it's also a great recreation of the video game. So in conclusion, like I said, I remember years ago when review copies of Monster Hunter World first got sent out to the big board game channels. And they, many of them said that there is room for this alongside other similar boss battlers. I always wondered if that would be the case for me. I can now confirm that I do share that opinion, at least for myself. Monster Hunter World Iceborne is a game that has clearly been refined very deliberately, beginning all the way back with Dark Souls, the board game, which itself has had some refining. It doesn't replace Dark Souls because of the dungeon crawling and looting that I enjoy so much in Dark Souls, but it actually does kind of replace the boss battles. It doesn't replace Primal the Awakening because sometimes I want to melt my brain at that ultimate altar of combo-tasticness. Like, it is the best at what it does in that regard. But sometimes I can't handle that. I want to hunt and carve a monster and walk away with a brain that feels challenged but not reduced to mush. And I freaking love Monster Hunter. Year after year. Your mileage on that may vary. If you are interested in Monster Hunter World Iceborne beyond the base game, and it's still February 2025, click through the link in the description to late pledge. And until next time, have a great rest of your day, and keep playing solo.